Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Wow, it is so great to see so many names popping into the attendance list today. Already over 2 dozen people. We're just getting kicked off. But we're going to give it just a couple minutes for folks to get acclimated to the room. We're going to do a quick introduction to the call, and we're going to get it kicked off. Again, for the folks that are just hopping in, thank you so much for being here. It's so exciting to be spending this evening with you talking about all the amazing work our team at Humane Rescue Alliance has been doing in 2023 and going into 24. We're going to be taking just a couple minutes, maybe a minute or two, to allow folks to get acclimated to the room. We're going to do a quick introduction of what the run of show is going to look like, and then we're going to be tossing it over to Lisa. So we're going to probably 3 after the hour, we're going to get it kicked off. Wow, it is so nice to see all of these names. I see so many amazing volunteers. I see corporate partners in here. I see staff. It is so nice to see our community coming together to hear about all the amazing work that's been going on. And again, folks, we're going to give it just one more minute to let people get settled into the room. We know sometimes folks are just getting off work at this hour and are hopping into those Zoom rooms. So we want to make sure we give just a couple minutes before we get kicked off. All right, so it's a little after 2 minutes after the hour, so we'll go ahead and get the introduction and the housekeeping out of the way. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bobby Mann. I'm the Chief Programs Officer for Humane Rescue Alliance and St. Hubert's Animal Welfare Center, and I'm so excited and honored to be helping facilitate today's community conversation with our President and CEO, Lisa LaFontaine. So before I kick it over to Lisa to talk about all the amazing work our staff has done in 2023 and a little tease into 2024, we're going to talk a little housekeeping. So we know we're going to talk about some of the work, but most importantly, we want to create space for all of you to ask your questions. So if this is your first time using a Zoom webinar, we want to show you how you can enter your questions for Lisa to be able to answer later on in the call. So if you take your mouse and you hover over your screen, you are going to see some boxes open up at the bottom of your screen. And one of those boxes that you're going to see is one that says Q&A. If you hover over that box and click that box, that is going to open up the ability to send in questions to us. So anytime during the call, if something comes to mind or if you have something in mind already, type it into that box. And at the end of the call, we're going to look at all the questions, and with whatever remaining time we have left, we're going to use it to answer your questions. So again, hover your mouse toward the bottom of the screen, click on the Q&A box, and enter your question there. So again, thank you so much for being here about today's community conversation. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it over to our President and CEO, Lisa LaFontaine.
Thank you, Bobby, and happy Thursday, everybody. It's really good to be here. I saw the list of all of your names. I know many of you, and a lot of you gave a lot of support to us over the last year. And I'll tell you, it was so deeply appreciated because I would say last year was one of our most challenging years for a number of reasons, and I'll get into that a little bit during this presentation. I do want to highlight a happy ending. So this is me with Miss Molly. So Molly came in on a very hot day in August. We had just had the first positive diagnosis of canine influenza 2 days before, so on a Thursday. And one of the things that we were trying very hard to do, because this is a devastatingly communicable disease, was to limit bringing animals into the shelter. And one of the ways that we did that is by trying to send more animals into foster. And so the first diagnosis came on a Thursday. Saturday morning, we had 2 humane law enforcement cases of mother dogs with puppies. And the last thing we wanted to do was bring puppies and nursing mothers into the environment where influenza was living. And so I took Molly home, and she was I've fostered so many animals over the years, and like many of them, she was really nervous at first and had just come from her home and was trying to sort things out. She was really good in my home, but when she transferred to the next foster home, she started showing some real behavior issues, some growling and just signs of tension and nervousness. And so we were able to find another staff member who could take her in for the duration of the law enforcement hold. And it just turned out that she bonded with this staff member. And when she came to us, her name was Champagne. When she was adopted, her name is now Molly. And so Molly has been adopted by Lawrence Minnis, who is our director of learning and development. And she's a wonderful dog now and a part of the family. And she comes to the office regularly. And so I just loved seeing her face because she was so vulnerable. She only weighed about 40 pounds when she came in. She's over 60 pounds now. So Molly is an example of the kind of dog that we were able to help through the foster program last year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when we go on. Next slide. So I want to start out by setting a national context because while we are a community organization here in Washington, D.C., we're also part of a network of national shelters who talk to each other regularly, who share best practices, who share challenges and concerns, and who try to support each other staff to staff, because this work is lonely, it's challenging, it's difficult, and it's really good to be part of a larger community. And our national animal welfare community struggled mightily during 2023 because what we all saw, east to west coast, north to south, is that all of our dogs, all of our shelters were full of primarily large dogs. We certainly saw that at HRA, where at one point this summer we had dogs in crates. But some of our colleagues had as many as 1,200 too many dogs at a time. And while I don't want to minimize the challenge that we had because it was really difficult, what our sister shelters were facing in literally 1,000 or more extra animals than they had capacity for, I think speaks to the intensity of what is happening in America for shelter dogs. And we're still trying to understand, why is this happening? It's not true for cats. By and large, although there's some regional variations, but by and large, the number of cats coming into shelters and the number of cats being adopted out is generally balanced in most places. But what we're seeing, and this is large dogs, this is dogs over 50 pounds, they're just staying with us longer. And adoptions are flat, they're way down over what they were before the pandemic. And so I think that as we were first starting to see this trend late in 2022, we were hoping it was temporary. We were hoping it was a post-pandemic correction. But I think we have to acknowledge that this is a problem that is here to stay. And we have to develop solutions with the assumption that we're going to continue to see more large dogs sitting in shelters. And we've talked a lot, both within HRA, but also with our colleagues, about what is going on. And it's complex. It's a confluence of issues that are colliding to put us all in the most challenging of circumstance. For one thing, people are having a harder and harder time keeping their pets. They love them, they want to keep them, but if you lose your job, if you lose your home, if you have to transition to a job that pays less, if you get divorced, that puts your relationship with your pet in peril. And so we're seeing more and more people who come in here with tears in their eyes to surrender because they don't know what else to do. And this is rooted in two, I mean, there are a lot of reasons and a lot of individual circumstances, but there are two major themes. One is housing that doesn't allow for dogs, and especially for big dogs. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the other is that people can't afford vets, or they can't get a vet appointment. Veterinarians left the veterinary profession in larger numbers than usual during COVID, and they haven't come back. in the same numbers. And so there is a nationwide shortage of veterinarians. There are only about a little less than 36 veterinary schools in the country, and they have a finite number of vets that they graduate every year. And so the numbers just aren't keeping up with the population of people who want to provide their pets with pet care. So one thing we know that we have to do in order to address this is to think about housing policy and to also expand access to veterinary services and just generally expand pet support services, because people are struggling to keep their pets. And every single time someone gives up a pet that they don't want to have to give up, it's a tragedy. I think the second thing we have to think about is where we shelter animals. And HRA has always had a robust foster program. We are very lucky to have so many people that open their homes and their hearts to our shelter animals. But we've had to expand our foster system pretty significantly in the last year because we had way more dogs, especially, than we had cage spaces. And so one way to gain cage spaces is to recruit and train and engage more foster families. So we had a significant uptick in foster homes. But I think we have to really think differently about how we shelter animals and where we shelter animals. And then finally, and this is something that is deeply concerning to me and so many of my colleagues, people are not coming to our shelters to adopt. And the numbers are way down from what they were before the pandemic. And I think that as painful as it is, we have to orient ourselves to the idea that people coming to shelters to adopt the way that they used to has most likely been permanently disrupted. And there are a couple of things going on, and we have solutions to some of them. One is that we know that there was a real burst of adoptions in the first quarter of the pandemic. And so a lot of people that probably weren't normally going to get a dog for another year or so rushed in and got a dog at the beginning of the pandemic. So the timing of adoptions has shifted for them. And we're kind of waiting for that rhythm to get back into an order. But the second thing is that we have seen, I was at a invitation only supply and demand summit for dogs in American shelters last summer. And we had in the room the leaders of 5 of the larger animal shelters in the country, the heads of the SPCA, ASPCA, HSUS, Best Friends, the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, the AKC, even some brick and mortar corporate pet stores. And we spent a day looking at data that showed that more and more people are getting dogs. But then we looked at our own data and saw that for every single one of those groups, the acquisition of dogs from our groups was going down. And what that made us realize is someone is not in the room. There is someone who has taken our adoption market share who is not represented in this room. And we quickly came to realize that it was internet-based pet sales organizations. Sometimes they're very blatant that they're selling pets. Other times they design websites that make them look like rescue groups. So I think people think they're rescuing when in fact, these dogs are coming from breeders and puppy mills. And we're all deeply concerned about that because it makes sense that a population of people who got used to every service being delivered virtually during the pandemic would want to continue to acquire pets virtually because they're getting their groceries, they're having their doctor's appointments virtually now. But we have grave questions about the welfare of those animals and how they're being bred and how they're being raised and cared for. We have big questions about what the matchmaking is and how are people being connected to the pets that they take home. But I think the biggest thing that we're worried about is that a website-based pet acquisition center does not have wraparound services. And it's really the wraparound services, the pet support, the training classes, the access to a behaviorist, the access to a medical team, people that can walk you through those first uncertain days of adoption. That's missing in these sites. And so what that makes us worried about is, do we have another wave of animals who are going to be coming in as people reach a frustration level and just don't have anyone to support them? So I'll talk a little bit more about what some of our solutions are as we go forward, but I just want to set a national context because we do not exist in a vacuum. We are part of a large community and a large movement. And it's not just that HRA had a difficult year. Every colleague that I have had the most difficult year of their career because of these issues last year. Next slide. So that was a kind of solemn overview, but I also want to make sure that you realize that thanks to your support, thanks to your generosity, we're able to create some real solutions in 2023. And the first thing that we launched early last year is a pilot field veterinary program. What we were seeing is that we were getting more and more calls of from concerned people that saw neighbors who had pets that looked like they were suffering from medical neglect. And we knew that people had economic challenges. We knew that they were struggling to get vet appointments or pay for those appointments. And the last thing we want to do is to a family in distress that's trying to take care of their pet and then maybe something goes awry, is then arrest them on top of that. They were trying to do the right thing in the first place, and they're doing everything they know to keep their pet. And so we thought we'll launch this field veterinary program so that when we get calls, either from a person who wants to surrender their pet because they don't know what else to do, or a neighbor who thinks that an animal may be neglected, that our first outreach would be from a veterinarian and a veterinary technician. And so we hired Dr. Gerbig early last year, and she launched very slowly in the first quarter. And what we found is that the bottom of the well is not visible to us. We have not had to do any marketing because this is a word of mouth service. Neighbors are telling neighbors, people are finding out about this at the front desk. And so we knew that this is a viable program that we need to fund and that we need to continue. So throughout the course of 2023, we supported 1,111 pets. And many of them would have surrendered those pets had we not intervened. So for any of you who know what it was like to be in this building when we had so many dogs this summer, imagine what it would have been like if we had 1,100 more pets throughout the course of the year. This was a welfare program. This was a life-saving program, but most importantly, over 1,100 families got to keep the family member that they thought they might be losing. And so these are just two examples of animals we helped this year. Angel came to us. She had a baseball-sized cyst on her tail. It was causing her great pain and discomfort. And if you think of a dog who can't even wag their tail, you can imagine how much that compromised her life. And her owner was going to surrender her, but we were able to do the surgery. It was a very routine surgery for our doctors. And she returned home the next day, and her people could not have been more grateful for that. Dax was a complicated case. We saw him initially just as a wellness check because his person was having a hard time getting him into a vet appointment, and he needed vaccines and just a once over from a veterinarian. But a couple months later, she called us in distress because Dax had gotten into rat poison, and it was likely going to be fatal. So Dr. Gerbig went out and did blood work to test the liver function, how are the organs working, what do we think the level of exposure is to this poison, and determined that with a medical regimen that included subcutaneous fluid, that we could get the poison out of Dax's body. And the owner wanted to participate in the care. So Dr. Gerbig trained her to provide subcutaneous fluid to Dax. And then we would check in to see, are his levels returning to normal? Are things trending in the right direction? And so if you think about it, 2 years ago, Dax would have come in and been surrendered, and we would have treated him and perhaps given him to another family. But in this case, we went in the home where Dax was familiar, and we worked with his mom, and she participated in healing him. So she is feeling more empowered. She's feeling more connected to him. And now this feels like a success, something she did for him. So the field vet program isn't just about keeping pets in their homes. It's about empowering their owners to provide care. And in addition to this, we've had quite a severe parvo outbreak in the community this year. And one of the things that our team has been doing is giving out parvo kits so that people can treat parvo in the home, subcutaneous fluids, special diet, medication. And again, this is empowering their owners. So we love this program, and it's here to stay. Next slide. And in general, we're looking at all of the pet support that we can do, whether it's answering a question that people have, talking someone through a challenge that they don't know if they can solve, guiding them in how to have a conversation with a landlord, or in many cases, actually admitting the pet for overnight or short-term inpatient care so that we can treat them and send them back home as soon as possible. And so in 2023, we treated 190 pets through our Treat to Return program. So this is on top of the 1,100 in the field veterinary program. So that's another 190 animals who would have come into the shelter, but instead we treated them and sent them home. And so Heidi, who's on the top, she was a victim of a house fire and was rescued by DC Fire and Rescue and brought on an emergency vehicle to Friendship Animal Hospital. And we were able to find her microchip and realize that she was adopted from HRA. And we admitted her to keep an eye on her for a couple of days and then sent her home with her family. Leche, who is the cat on the bottom left, had a digestive disorder and was losing weight uncontrollably. So again, we admitted him for about a day and a half, got him stable, and was able to send him home with his dad. And Al Capone had a spinal issue, and he was largely paralyzed in the back end. And his family had tried to rig up a wheelchair using PVC pipes and all the duct tape and things that they had at home. And again, HRA and many shelters would have taken Al Capone in from his owners and treated him and figured out what to do and found a new home for him. We decided that rather than do that, it was a lot cheaper to buy him a wheelchair, to train his family in the use of the wheelchair, and send him home. And so these are the types of things we're doing to keep animals out of the shelter and in their homes. And you can expect to see us heavily investing in these types of programs, because if the family is loving and willing and wants to keep the pet, it's better to support them in doing that than breaking the bond and taking them into the shelter system. Next slide. So sending animals home is our absolute most favorite thing to do. And we do that through lost pet reunification. So through our animal control contract with the District of Columbia, we take in lost pets or pets who are roaming out in the community. About 5% of the cats that we take in as stray eventually go home to their owners. And it's more like 50%, 52% of the dogs that go back to their owners. And we have a lost and found person who goes through lost reports, whose job it is to scour listservs and look for people who've filed a claim of a missing pet, matching it up in our shelter. And so we've increased the amount of lost animals we're sending home by 33%, which again is getting them out of the shelter more quickly, opening up capacity, getting them in their homes. We also do transport to sister organizations if they have space to take animals. The problem is most places that we would transfer animals to are now suffering through this same capacity challenge that we are. one of the things that we've done with transport is we have a regular transport that goes to our sister shelter in New Jersey. St. Hubert's has a wonderful program called the Way Station, which is a transport program that has always taken animals from shelters where there are too many animals and not enough homes, brought them to St. Hubert's, either transferred them to a receiving rescue partner to be adopted or kept them at St. Hubert's to be adopted. And this year, our amazing Way Station team came to us and said, look, we know that you're really struggling with capacity in DC, and we can't in good conscience take animals from shelters in the Southeast when our colleagues in DC are struggling to care for animals. So we've had a regular transport going to St. Hubert's, except for an interruption when we both had the flu. Pretty much every other week, animals are going there. And so that's our favorite, obviously, transport approach. And then adopting animals out to loving homes is, again, such a meaningful thing to do. And so this year, nearly 9,500 animals went to homes through those three mechanisms: reunification, transport, or adoption. And these are just two of our really happy endings. Elsa, as you can see, was a puppy who had a terrible case of mange. And she wasn't going to attract much attention, covered in scabs and not having hair. And this was a very treatable form of mange. And we treated her and she recovered in a foster home. And you can see her in all her beauty and glory in her new home on the right. Bolt had a terrible accident, lost her nose, part of her jaw, some of her teeth, a lot of skin, and she was pretty miserable. She couldn't eat normally, she couldn't chew, she couldn't sniff normally, she was uncomfortable. And because we have so many donors, many of whom are on the call, who give us money to do specialized surgery on animals like Bolt, we were able to send her to a reconstructive specialist to essentially completely reconstruct the front of her face. And shortly after that, Bolt got a wonderful home. And really, this is our goal for the animals, that when they find a home, they live the good life. And so here is Bolt living the good life in her new home. And that's thanks to you, many of you. Next slide. So I talked a little bit at the beginning about us thinking of creative ways to make space, because we have finite space at our shelters. And so one of the ideas that our team had was to start test drives. And a test drive is really a short-term fostering experience that either is intentionally just, I want to foster for a few days. I have a few days to bring an animal into my heart and my home, and I want to help you guys out. Or I'm really thinking about adopting this animal. I'd like to see how they settle into my home before I make the final commitment. So this program had an incredible success rate in 2023. 674 dogs went on test drives, and over half of them were adopted after the 7-day period. Peanut, who you see here on the National Mall, was a super high energy dog. The family met her and they really liked Peanut, but Peanut was jumping and excited, and the people weren't sure what that was going to be like in the home. But when they took Peanut into their home and had a few days to really settle down, they realized that this would be a good permanent match. And so Peanut got adopted by the family, and this is the ultimate happy ending. Next slide. So it's not all dogs and cats for us, because we have the animal control contract with the DC government. We get called not only when there is a dog or cat who is running loose or in distress, but really for any animal that is in distress. And I think you could probably not name a species of animal that we have not taken in over the last 15 years. We have seen caimans, which are like alligators. We've had to rehome an emu and a monkey and all kinds of exotic animals. And sometimes wildlife who, especially during mating season or during the season when they're trying to establish their own territory, get themselves into jams, particularly in the city environment. So in late May, we were tracking a young juvenile black bear who was in PG County, and we were having a lot of reports of people that had seen the bear, and the bear was getting close to humans, and people were concerned. And then one June morning, we got a call that this bear was in a tree in the Brooklyn area, the neighborhood of DC. And just to set the stage for you, I got a call early in the morning that there was some concern that the bear was going to be shot by emergency responders. But we were on the way, and our animal control officers are some of the only people in the city who have the training to do chemical capture, which is essentially injecting through a dart a tranquilizer that puts the animal into a sleepy state for a short period of time. And we safely put them in a transport vehicle, bring them to an appropriate rescue spot, and then reverse the tranquilizer. And so on that June morning, it was a pretty high stakes operation because crowds had come out. It was that weekend when there was a lot of smog, and so schools were closed, a lot of offices were closed, and people were just out in the streets watching the bear. He pretty much looked like this most of the time. He was just sitting peacefully in a tree, but it was startling to people. And our field services team got on the site with a new and better tranquilizer than anything we'd used in the past. And Officer Dan Duramo, who is the director of our field services team, was able to, when Franklin came out of the tree, he was able to get a dart into Franklin's leg on one try. And we moved him safely with the collaboration of our friends from the Smithsonian Institution, who had staff and a proper vehicle and a proper crate to transport Franklin. And in collaboration with Maryland Fish and Game, we were able to identify an appropriate relocation spot for Franklin, bring him into that remote area of Maryland, and reverse the tranquilizer. So this was a happy ending. You know, in some cities, Franklin would have been killed. There was no reason for that. He was just a curious bear who had been kicked out by his mom and was looking for a new nesting territory. And we put a tracker on him so we know how he's doing. And one of the really beautiful things is that because school was out, all these kids from DC were in the streets and they saw it, and they had pads and they were doing interviews with our officers. And this turned out to be a wonderful, probably once in a lifetime memory for those kids who saw helping professionals come out, do their jobs with great competency, and save a beautiful wild animal who then went to a more appropriate location. Next slide. So if for all of you on this call who are foster families, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. My husband and I have fostered probably a couple hundred animals over the years, and we've seen the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. And so I know what it's like for you when you take an animal into a home and maybe you struggle with a behavior issue, or it's a cat who's failing to thrive, a kitten who you're bottle feeding. We know the heart and soul that you put into those animals. And we're so grateful that so many people stepped forward to foster. And pretty much throughout 2023, we look at this statistic every day. On any given day, 55% on average, sometimes more, sometimes less, of the daily animal population were living in foster homes. And the beauty is that people get to know the animals in a home environment. They can advocate for their true personality, which is sometimes hidden in the institutional setting of a shelter. But many of those foster families find friends and neighbors and loved ones to adopt those animals. So they're expanding our foster pool. We had a nearly 80% increase in sending dogs into foster care and about a 25% increase in sending cats into foster homes. Next slide. So this was an exceptionally challenging year for us medically, and a few things came together to make this a real ordeal for our staff, our volunteers, the animals themselves. What happened is that, so one thing I'll tell you is that in April of 2023, the only veterinarian east of the river in wards 7 and 8, closed her doors. She retired. And so what that meant is an estimated 70 to 75,000 animals who live east of the river had no veterinarian, no pet supply store, only one grocery store, no trainers, no groomers. It's what we call a pet desert, and it was an almost complete pet desert. And we have to ask ourselves, what does it mean that all these animals that would have been getting wellness vaccines at that veterinary clinic weren't getting them throughout 2023? I'm sure some of the disease that we saw was a result of animals not being vaccinated. So we expanded the number of vaccine clinics that we were doing. We do them regularly every month, sometimes every other week. We also do an additional 8 vaccine clinics in partnership with the District of Columbia. We have vaccine clinics at our site, although because of the influenza, we had to stop doing that because we didn't want to bring healthy animals in to vaccinate them, only to expose them to a contagious disease. But luckily, our partners at the Department of Health approved that rather than do these clinics at our facilities, that we could do additional vaccine clinics in the community. So we did many more vaccine clinics in the community starting in August and through the end of the year than we normally would do to try to make up, close some of that gap. But the bottom line is we saw more cases of panleukopenia in cats, more cases of parvovirus in dogs, and then a devastating canine influenza outbreak that again was not just us. It was happening at Barks in Baltimore. It was happening in Delaware. It was happening in Virginia, happened in PG County. This disease is out there in the world, and we certainly suffered from it in our shelters. While we think we saw cases earlier in the year, the first positive test for the most insidious form of influenza came back in the first week of August. And it was a 141-day battle of personal protective equipment for our staff and volunteers, special protocols that sometimes changed by the week, different use of space, where we had a clean space that we'd designate, but then if an animal would break out with a flu, that was no longer a clean space, and we would have to find another one. Every day was a grueling day of Tetris as we looked at housing and placement of animals. I do want to say that our staff and volunteers were real heroes throughout this. It's not easy under any circumstances to walk shelter dogs, particularly in this building that isn't particularly well designed for that. But what was even harder is that they were doing it in full PPE equipment in the hottest days of August. So to all of you on this call, staff and volunteers who did that, thank you so much. We would not have gotten through this pandemic without that dedication and that adherence to the protocols. And in December, we added a second tech and vet tech team, which allowed us to increase our veterinary capacity to see more wellness appointments and to give out more vaccines. And more will be coming in 2024. Next slide. So these are some of our our metrics highlights for the year. And I'm just going to read through them quickly because these are boring slides and you can read. And I want to get to your questions. But despite all the challenges we faced, despite the fact that each one of us who worked here struggled at some point during this year, often for many days and weeks at a time, we made a tremendous impact. And it's something that we say to our staff constantly, that in the midst of the most challenging year in memory, you guys did an amazing job of helping animals. And so 9,500 animals, nearly 9,500 animals went home through adoption, transport, or reunification. Our organization-wide live release rate was 91%. It was just under 90% in DC. It was about 96% in New Jersey. and that is primarily because of the disease outbreaks. Our medical team did 6,600 surgeries and procedures, ranging from spay neuter to dental care to lump removal or limb removal or pyometria surgery or cherry eye, you name it. But they were busy on top of the flu doing procedures. Our behavior staff completed 7,436 enrichment sessions for the animals in our care. Next slide. And I do want to point out, you saw the asterisk at the bottom of the slide. These numbers are for our combined St. Hubert's and HRADC campuses. Foster families housed 1,452 animals. Our volunteers time gifted over 52,000 of hours to us. Nearly 23,000 animals got pet food, which often made the difference between a surrender and staying in the home through the DC Pet Pantry. And we gave out nearly 228,000 pounds of food through the St. Hubert's Pet Pantry. Next slide. I've mentioned many of these statistics. I'll say that 61 animals were housed through our Safe Haven program. And so the Safe Haven program is for survivors of domestic abuse who are trying to get out of their homes, who often don't do so because they don't want to leave their animals because their abuser has threatened to hurt their animals, or because they can't find housing with their animal. And so we fostered 61 animals, and we do this through specialized foster homes who know what they're signing up for, who stay completely anonymous, and they keep the animals until the abused partner, almost always women, but we've had a couple of men in the program, get back on their feet, find a home where they can have their pet, and they reunify. Next slide. So we vaccinated over 9,000 animals, rescued 1,700 wild animals, in addition to Franklin, completed nearly 1,500 community cat spay-neuter surgeries and basic vaccines for community cats. And our field officers responded to nearly 20,000 calls for help. Next slide. So looking ahead, I just want to give you a preview of some of the things that we're doing. We want to continue to grow our volunteer and foster community because our volunteers help walk animals. They help with every single thing we do, but especially we want to grow the foster subset of that volunteer community so that more animals can be spending time in foster homes. Because we know people aren't going to shelters, we want to increase off-site adoptions. So we're doing more and more adoptions at stores, community festivals, farmers markets, businesses, and that's going to increase. I want to give a shout out. I know Dottie Fitzgerald is on this call, and Fitzgerald is one of our very best partners. They have regular adoption events. I think Cindy Martin is here. She is at every single one of them. And those events are wonderful and bring so many people that wouldn't otherwise know of us into our community and help the animals find homes. We want to do more between the St. Hubert's and DC campus to make the best use of best practices, efficiencies, continue to transport animals, and integrate a lot of our protocols. And then finally, we've got to go after this issue of access to veterinary care. And so we have signed a lease with what was formerly Whitman Walker's Max Robinson Center, which is on MLK Boulevard. It's about 700 feet from Dr. Ashley's clinic. Dr. Ashley was the only veterinarian east of the river. And so we're opening a medical center and really a whole pet support center for pets 700 feet away. It's the first time we've had a presence east of the river. We're already doing adoption events there every weekend and adopting out animals. And we're doing a soft launch to get up and running. The first thing we'll do is have our field veterinary team based out of that facility. We're currently recruiting for an additional veterinarian and 2 technicians to do even more services out of that site. And I hope and expect that this is a permanent placement for us and that we are going to move into the community and stay there. So that's just a highlight. There are a lot of things that we have on our plates for 2024, but I'd like to wrap up now and see if anybody has any questions, Bobby.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I know I'll be coming on camera in just a second. Yes, there are so many great and thoughtful questions. I want to thank the audience for being so attentive and having these amazing questions to wrap our call with. I will also be mindful of time. We have over 15 questions actually, and so we're going to try to go in them by order for folks that started early on in the call with your questions. So we apologize if we don't get to all of them, but I'm going to try to summarize them as much as possible. Lisa, there's I think a really important conversation. You talked a lot about the tactical things that we're doing within the organization, but you as the leader, someone wants to know, what are you thinking about or prioritizing, or what are the things that are keeping you up at night?
I think I talked about some of them. So one thing that keeps me up at night is this indisputable change in behavior in how people in America adopt pets. And just accepting that it's never going to be the same. And there's only so much you can do through cute promotions or fee-waived adoptions. That's not a solution. It's a Band-Aid. What we really need to do is to figure out customer behavior, to get much more sophisticated about getting inside adopters' heads and figuring out why do they want to adopt, how do they want to adopt, when do they want to adopt, designing experiences that match those desires, designing experiences that don't compromise the welfare of animals, but improve convenience and remove barriers, make matchmaking more fun, and I think utilize technology, because one thing that I learned in this Pet Supply and Demand Summit that I was at is that the significant sector of people adopting has skipped a generation from boomers to Gen X, and I mean to millennials. Skipped Gen X, and millennials are the most common adopters of pets now, and millennials are very tech savvy and want to use technology. And so we've got teams of people looking at every aspect of and surveying people about adoption desires and how we can do a better job of syncing up with that. The other thing that keeps me up at night is it's getting more and more expensive to do this work. And so we have got to think outside of the box and how do we bring in new revenue? That is not just philanthropy, although philanthropy is very important and we want to continue to grow our philanthropy. But by and large, we have raised money off animal stories. And as you can see from this presentation, there are people in the equation almost every time. And so what we need to do is have different kinds of storytelling, different kinds of engagement with donors to talk about the ways we help people and families and community, as well as animals. Because when we help animals, we lift all boats. We make the community better, we make people happier. And that's a story we haven't told through our philanthropy program as much as we could. And so we look forward to growing that. And then just what are some ways that we can earn different kinds of revenue? For anyone who's been to our St. Hubert's campus, and I know we have some of our St. Hubert's team members on the call, we have a pet supply store that generates about $300,000 a year in income for us. We have a doggy daycare. We actually have 2 doggy daycare centers now. We have about 118 training classes that are running at any given time at St. Hubert's. All of that brings in money that bolsters philanthropy and supports the mission work. And so we're looking at how can we do more to create these micro businesses to generate more money. And then I think the other thing that that really the other thing that I think about is that a lot of people don't know about our services. Even if they've lived in DC for generations, they may not know about us because they live in an area that doesn't see us. And so as a matter of fact, Lawrence Minnis, who's our Director of Learning and Development, grew up in Southeast DC, but didn't know about HRA until he came to volunteer with us and go through our dog tags program in 2008. So we've got to elevate our brand. We've got to elevate our messaging. We've got to get our brand out in multiple languages in multiple ways that respect culture and people of different ethnicities and religions. So just connecting with more people, I think, is the most important thing we can do. And it's something that it doesn't keep me up at night in a bad way, but I know we've really got to get to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the equitable approach that HRA is trying to take is the reason why I'm here. You know, you talk about supporting both ends of the leash, not just the pet, but the person, is what I love, and also the customer experience, right? And so when you're talking about customers or clients and their experience, I want to go to the next question, which is related to the dogs in our care, who we also look at as clients or customers. So folks are asking, with dogs staying in shelters longer than they have recently, what are we doing to provide them enrichment and support while they are here?
So if anyone follows any of our social media, either Facebook or Instagram, you'll see that both at St. Hubert's and in DC, we create enrichment boxes and we do training sessions and our volunteers get them out into our play yards. But we had a wonderful opportunity at the end of 2023 to partner up with Dr. Lisa Gunter, who is a animal behavior scientist at Virginia Tech. And she and her colleague have started and have been given the opportunity by Virginia Tech to create the first tenured dog behavior program in the country. And so Dr. Gunter and her colleagues came in and looked at our behavior program, soup to nuts, all the things that we're doing, from intake to interviews with owners to when we do medical appointments, to when we do and how we do behavior assessments, to what kind of enrichment sessions. And she's going to be delivering a report to us, I think, in the next week or so. And we're really excited because part of the report is going to be recommendations for how do we do more in ways that are efficient, that don't add burden to our staff and volunteers, to do more enrichment and more training with shelter dogs during the time that they're with us. So if we can't get a dog into a foster home where the foster owner can learn some of this and do some of this work with the dog, we've got to increase the volume of what we're doing for the dogs in the shelter.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm going to actually drop Dr. Gunter's website in the chat because she has done some of the most fascinating research that I've ever seen. She has measured cortisol levels of dogs while they're in shelter care to see what's actually working and not working for them. So if folks want to see the type of professionals we're working with, please check out that website. Lisa, the next question is actually related to policy and lobbying work. The question is related to, are we doing anything related to breed sales, especially the doodles that we're seeing? But I'd like to actually broaden that question as well. If not about doodles or breeds, is there any other policy work that we're focused on that you think is going to be beneficial to keeping families together?
Yes, so every year we try to pick one or two legislative priorities to work on with the council offices in the District of Columbia. And we have to pick carefully because there are so many policy needs in DC that we have to pick things that are implementable and that we can get support for, that we know that there's a grassroots effort to lobby for this legislation. And so this year's priority is actually a pets and housing bill that we're doing with at-large council member Robert White. And I think that we have a press release to announce that the week after next. And what this piece of legislation is going to do is going to go right after some of these barriers to having pets in homes. And the two things that we're looking at is removing any reference to breed, weight, or size in these restrictions, because what we found is even if you lift the breed restriction, oftentimes they'll put a size or a weight restriction in. So we're trying to tackle the whole thing and remove all of those restrictions. We also want to get housing authorities to comply with the fact that people who have service animals have the right to have those animals in the home. It's not up to the landlord. And so that's an issue of compliance that will be baked into this bill, we hope, in its final iteration. And then finally, we're trying to reduce the burden of pet deposits, because in some cases, landlords are asking people to give a month's rent or half a month's rent, and that can be a four-figured enterprise. So what this bill contains is a clause that the maximum you can do is a quarter of 1 month's rent as a pet deposit. So again, what we hope is that that lowers the barrier so that more people who live in DC or are moving into DC can have pets regardless of size, appearance, perceived breed, or weight.
And I know that there's going to be a press conference and a public announcement after this. And what I appreciate about that even more, Lisa, is how you talk them into also turning that into an adoption event, because you never miss a good opportunity to get some adoptables out there.
Yes,
So
yes.
not just adoptables, let's talk a little bit about fostering. There's a question about our test drive program. Somebody would like to know, even if they cannot adopt, what is the value of fostering a dog for just a week or two?
Oh, what a great question. So there's actually a study, Bobby, I don't know if you have access to it, a study that has been done about the impact of times out of the shelter for shelter dogs. And what we know is that even if they get out for a couple of days, they exhale. If you've fostered, you know that when you put a dog or a cat into your vehicle and take them home, you see their behavior letting down the minute you get them home. And you see that every day they're becoming a little bit more themselves. And I think the thing that's hard is because some animals respond to institutional living worse than others. And sometimes they show behaviors that they wouldn't have shown normally because they're scared. I mean, my daughter had a dog from New York Ave who was so barrier aggressive that he never would have gotten adopted from New York Ave. But when we fostered him, we literally never heard him bark again except in his sleep. And so sometimes their true personalities are masked by being in the shelter. So if you take them home, even for a weekend or a week, you're going to see aspects of their personality that we didn't see. And that is going to bolster their chances for adoption. That's going to help us know more about them. It's going to help us matchmake more. You might even meet a neighbor who falls in love with them when you have them out for a walk. And they might not come back to the shelter, even if you were expecting to bring them back, because you've met someone that wants to give them a home. And I think that any time out of the shelter is proven to reduce cortisol levels and improve health. So that's why these test drives are so great and why we're promoting them. So please, if you're even thinking about it, reach out to our team and we'll get you set up. I think the other thing that I'd say, Bobby, is that I know from talking to fosters, the biggest barrier to adoption, to fostering, is thinking you can't handle it, thinking you're not going to be able to give the pet up. And oftentimes if people go through that first round where they take an animal in and they either find them a home or they bring them back through test drive and see them get adopted, now they know they can do it and they're in deep.
Yeah, and we saw the data that proved it, right? These short-term fosters, about 50% plus, are getting adopted. So, with that challenge in front of us, there's nobody better we'd want to partner with than with our community. So I know we're getting close to wrapping up, and we still have quite a few questions left. But Lisa, the next question that we have is actually about corporate partnerships. There's a lot of donors on this call that are saying, we are investing into the work, but are there any corporations that are also giving to help the mission?
Well, one of the biggest ones that's been helping us actually is Mars. And for anyone that doesn't know, Mars Corporation, which is everyone thinks of as the candy company, is a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate with many subsidiaries, and they employ more vets than any other entity in the world. And so we have a new partnership with VCA, where every shelter animal gets a vet visit up to $250 in value, but it's a free basic first exam in the first week after adoption. So that is launching. I think the VCA team was here training our team in that. So that's a great way for people to have the experience of bringing their brand new pet to a vet in the first week. And it's not uncommon for dogs and cats to break with URI in the first few days, just because there are changes in their environment and it's a transition, and sometimes getting in a home actually brings out these underlying URIs. So having a veterinary solution in that first week, we think will be really important in not having returns. And then Mars is also giving free vet food to all of our shelter animals, which removes the cost of paying for pet food.
Thank you, Lisa. I want to get to this last question before you have close us out and send us into our evenings. But someone wanted to acknowledge it has been absolutely a challenging year. And so, what have we been doing to invest into our team regarding morale or training or retention? So, did you want to take that?
Yeah, so we have significantly invested in learning and development um, so that people can have career paths here. So we've created a learning and development team. Um, they are doing multiple types of training, from liaising with Maddie's Fund on a variety of online trainings that help people build their skills in everything from communication to knowledge about laws and policy. But it's a really well-rounded program, and we're also doing a lot of hands-on training. Remind me, Bobby, what is Lawrence's mantra around learning and development?
How do you see yourself grow?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so a lot of it is not guessing what people want to do and what they want to become, but creating pathways and mentoring so that people who maybe take an entry-level job have a little bit of time in their day to experience another department, to do a ride along with an officer, to shadow our medical team, and see if there's a career path that they want to follow. And then we'll create personalized programs for them to get them where they want to go in this career.
Yeah, and I think the one last thing I would mention about that, Lisa, is also just the real investment in diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically to race equity hiring. Our goal as we are partnering with our community is to be culturally competent and also model what our community demographics look like. And so the fact that we have seen substantial increase in diversity in leadership, as well as pipelines for our staff that want to grow into leadership positions, has been incredibly inspiring to me. So, Lisa, I know it is past the top of the hour, and so I wanted to toss over to you to close or giving us any parting words.
Well, I think that while last year was really hard and we believe that there is a new normal, we also think there were some really unique circumstances that made things more challenging. So we're pretty optimistic with these additional programs that we have, much of it in DC based around we have not got a name for it, but the old Max Robinson Center building. I think what's really exciting about it is that people in Wards 7 and 8 have used that as their family healthcare building for 35 years. And so Whitman Walker moved its family healthcare to the St. Elizabeth's campus. But this is a facility that people are used to getting care at. They're used to being served. They're used to being held. And so we're hoping to go in a really seamless way and say, now we're here for your pets. We're here for a part of your family that hasn't had any care. And we're trying not to, we want to be pretty curious and low key about how we go in, because we don't really know what the community needs, because we haven't lived east of the river ever in our history. So we want to have a little bit of humility around what kind of services people want. We're going to have a lot of focus groups and a lot of surveys. We're going to work with the local council member and ANCs to define the types of service. The one thing we absolutely know, there are actually two things we absolutely know we will do there. We will give out pet food and supplies from that place, from that campus, and we will offer veterinary services from that campus. But I think it's going to be so much more when it comes to pet support and linking people through a case management system to other social services partners. So it's really going to be our place east of the river, and we think it's going to significantly stem the tide of animals coming in the doors. We know that just through the rudimentary things we did, additional vaccine clinics, the field veterinary program, the treat to return program, we kept about 1,500 animals out of the shelter who otherwise would have been in here with us figuring out where to put them in 2023. And so we believe that we launched those pretty quickly. And as we scale them, we're going to be able to keep more and more pets in their families with the people that love them. So I can't thank everybody on this call helped us in some way. And we thank you for your generosity, for your kindness, for your offers of help, and for your ongoing support. And we're probably going to call on you again in 2024, but I think we have some really good plans to help turn the tide for animals and the people in DC for the next 10 or 20 years. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone.